the best way to learn how to write is to study other books intentionally. And that's what we're doing right now. The Netflix show, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, just premiered about a week ago, and it is based off of the wonderful book by Holly Jackson, I believe. So we are going to go to the whiteboard and analyze every single chapter of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, looking at the structure and looking at how the stakes are raised, the conflict is escalated, and the narrative drive is pushed forward in every single scene. So here we go. Here is our Good Girl's Guide to Murder board. It's actually an outline. So A Good Girl's Guide to Murder was published in 2019. It then blew up on TikTok, and now it's a major TV show on Netflix. The blurb is, pretty and popular high school senior Andy Bell was murdered by her boyfriend Sal Singh, who then killed himself. It was all anyone could talk about. And 5 years later, Pip sees how the tragedy still haunts her town. But she can't shake the feeling that there was more to what happened that day. She knew Sal when she was a child, and he was always so kind to her. How could he possibly have been a killer? Now a senior herself, Pip decides to re-examine the closed case for her final project. At first, just to cast doubt on the original investigation. But soon she discovers a trail of dark secrets that might actually prove Sal innocent. And the line between past and present begins to blur. Someone in Fairview doesn't want Pip digging around for answers, and now her own life might be in danger. The book has narrative and epistolary sections. So the epistolary sections are written in first person from Pippa's capstone journal. So the premise is this whole thing is a school project, kind of like her capstone end of year school project. And she's recording all of her thoughts and notes in this journal, which I'm calling these her investigation notes. And there are typically, at least for the first part of the book, a chapter is a narrative section and then sort of investigative notes going over what we learned, recording interviews, interviews with experts, transcripts, text exchanged, just her evidence gathering, basically. So what we're going to do in this video is we are going to go through every single chapter, and we're going to look at the last line of the chapter and talk about how that propels us forward, and also just the overall use and purpose of that chapter in the book. All right, so Act 1, Chapter 1. Here we have Pip's senior capstone project established. We literally get her proposal. Then in the narrative section, she goes to Ravi, Sal's brother, to ask for an interview. The last line of the narrative section is, because I don't think your brother did it, and I'm going to try to prove it. And the investigative last line is, even though Andy has never been found and her body never recovered, most people accept that she is dead. And why is that? Sal Singh is why. Right out of the gate here, Pip states her desire explicitly out loud. This is a firmly established goal that has weight and a clear endpoint, which means the audience will know when she accomplishes it. It's interesting to see how this last line of the first chapter spotlights the goal of the book, establishing both Pippa's desire line and the major dramatic question. At the start of the chapter, Pippa wants an interview with Ravi, and that's her sub-goal or her scene goal in her larger story objective, which is proving Sal's innocence. I think it's really, really interesting how the last line of that first chapter establishes her desire, her goal. And we're going to see that throughout this analysis. And it's a really strong way to start off that narrative drive. In the investigative section here, we get the story of Andy's disappearance and stats about missing persons that demonstrate how unlikely it is for someone to disappear forever, their body never found. Note how this whole section has been crafted to leave us with questions about Andy's disappearance. Not to mention the curiosity seed in that last sentence right there about Sal. In Chapter 2, we have a scene with Pippa's family where they check in on her capstone project. The narrative last line is, maybe laughter was one of the very first things you lost after something like that. Pip is thinking of the Bells and the Singhs. The Bells are the victim's family, and the Singhs are the murderers, in quotation marks, family. In this moment, and she's comparing her happy family to the devastation of the Bells and the Sings. Here we're establishing an emotional connection to the project, the high human worth at the center of Pippa's goal. 2 families destroyed by the murder. Otherwise, you would think this is quite a quiet scene, but that emotional stakes, that empathy building there, I think is really, really crucial for the story. And of course, we have the whole investigation notes at the end and the curiosity seeds that have already been established. And so that keeps us reading through a somewhat slow scene. He did it, they say. Sal Singh killed Andy, but I'm just not so sure. As readers, this prompts us to think, why doesn't Pip believe the story? Is she right? I mean, we're pretty sure she's right, because just as readers, we know that's how things work, but we're very, very curious about the details. In chapter 3, Pip goes over to the wards to spend time with her best friend, Kara, Kara's sister, Naomi, and their dad, Mr. Ward. There's laughing, there's friends, they're playing around, they use a German phrase about sausage. Here they check in, or Pippa really checks in with her plan to talk to Ravi with Kara. It's sausage to me is the last line, which is referencing that German thing. It's a funny line. It's meant to establish Pip's friendships. And although, again, this is a scene that's not like a story or doesn't seem to be a story related, the Ward family backstory becomes very key for the personal stakes for Pip later on. And of course, there's something very important that we're being introduced to in this chapter. So if I haven't said it before, I'm about to get into spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled for this, click off of the video now, please. But obviously, Mr. Ward is the killer, and he comes in at the end of the scene. And we're meeting him in chapter 3, so we meet the killer very, very early. The investigative line is, "It seems weird to me," and this is after she reviews some of that evidence. We just have another question posed here, getting the audience to wonder alongside her. There we go. Chapter 4 is Pip's interview with Ravi. He asks her why she's doing this, aka like investigating his brother. And her answer is, Sal was over at the Ward's house a lot when I was there. And when I was in my first year of middle school, these 2 boys were picking on me. I cried about it at the Ward's house, and Sal gave me his Kit Kat to cheer me up and told me exactly what to say to the bullies. Since then, he's always been a hero to me. The narrative line is, she caught the tail end of a smile, and this is Ravi smiling. And that's the last line. So here in this chapter, Pip is telling Ravi and us her motivation to pursue the project. This is really important because obviously the danger is going to mount, and so she needs compelling motivation here. It doesn't feel like the strongest, really, and we know that she's about to invest a lot of this, so it does need to be believable early on before her safety is threatened. But even though at the surface it doesn't feel like the strongest motivation, I think if we look closer, we can understand it a little bit more and see that it's actually quite powerful. It's all in that word hero. Audiences are predisposed to like heroes, especially a hero who helps an underdog. Holly Jackson is setting up the narrative of a hero in Sal Singh turned a villain, or a hero gone unrecognized, maligned. And we as audiences kind of freak out when there's like rampant unfairness. You think of a book where, I'm thinking of a scene in The Princess Diaries where Mia gets in trouble for pulling someone's hair extension out and they didn't get in trouble for ripping the patch off of her blazer. And I was so mad as a kid, being like, why didn't Lana get in trouble when she did the same thing? Or, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix is the whole thing with Umbridge. You get so viscerally mad. So I think that's what that's tapping into here. As writers, when we abstract to archetypes and familiar situations, like the hero who has become a villain, but who actually could be a victim, It appeals to universal values and ideals, which makes us feel the injustice more viscerally. Now, here's the moment where we pause and think about values and such. Remember that in the story grid, as well as Story by Robert McKee, there's a notion of the story value, which is basically a kind of a state of being. And the idea is that every genre focuses on a different value. And a crime story, which is what this is, focuses on the value of justice. So here, throughout this first few chapters, we're really establishing that we're in a state of injustice, that justice has not been served. From writing the breakout novel by Donald Mass, he says, honesty, integrity, loyalty, kindness, bravery, respect, trust, and love of one's fellow man are all measures of high human worth. They are also the keys to making life and death stakes count. That's what we're seeing established here. We're seeing Sal's principles and Pip's, and that's adding to that sense of high human worth, which makes the stakes feel real. As I understand it, making the stakes meaningful to an audience doesn't necessarily mean putting more people in greater danger, i.e., you're not necessarily going to make the audience feel like the stakes have been raised if it goes from one person might die to the whole world might end, but from attaching the story's outcome firmly to universal values like justice, like respect, like honesty, etc., etc. The investigative line here is, if I'm creating a persons of interest list, I think Jason Bell is going to be the first name. Note how she keeps a running persons of interest list. This is a really good way for the writer to kind of guide the reader's thinking about who is the murderer, as well as, kind of misdirect us or, misdirect us and keep track. It's curiosity invoking and horrifying to think about that Andy's father is the first person on Pip's list. So that's another, curiosity seed, reason we want to keep reading. Ooh. Chapter 5. Pip has an interview with Naomi Ward and Max Hastings. These were friends of Sal's. She adds Naomi to the persons of interest list. The last line is excellent timing. I just made some coffee. It seems like a super boring last line, except Mr. Ward says it, and Mr. Ward is the killer. Now, I really can't read anything into this necessarily on coffee is a metaphor for, death or something. I really don't think you can get that, but I do think it's interesting that chapter 5 ends on his line. Then in the investigative, we have Naomi added to the list. Here is a very clear stakes escalation that's helped by the backstory we got in chapter 3, which is Pip's best friend's sister, who's already lost so much, is on the suspect list. Now the outcome of the project could impact Kara and Pip, so it's impacting Pip personally. We're also noticing how Naomi is a super strong red herring throughout the entire book because she's often in scenes with Mr. Ward and obviously lives in the same house with him. And this allows some clues to originally be attributed to her rather than to him. So it's very, very strong red herring. Just like how kind of when Snape is following, Quirrell around and trying to stop him, he's in the same place as Quirrell. He's doing some of the same shady things. He knows some of the same information, and that makes him a great red herring. Chapter 6. Pip goes to the grocery store and she sees Ravi shunned by a grocery store worker who refuses to take his money. And this is all because of, the brothers, everyone thinking the brother is a murderer. The last line is, she was hollow when it left her. This scene is an emotional gut punch where the stakes are raised again and again. We have that appeal to those universal human values. Sal's family continues to be ostracized and isolated from the community. If Sal is innocent, these actions are terribly unfair. We also just see how like this family is so broken and how this town is treating them. And again, that's that emotional connection. Investigative line is, even I have more of a killer instinct than Naomi. Moving on to chapter 7. Ravi comes to visit Pip, so he comes over to her house. This is basically their forming allies moment. They go over 4 theories of what could have happened, and Ravi gives her Sal's phone. So they literally do walk through like the 4 scenarios, and that's very guiding to the reader, very helpful, and it helps us establish different theories. In chapter 8, they analyze Sal's messages. His last text is a break from his normal texting style, grammar punctuation-wise, and this pokes holes in the official story. It is supposedly, she said, until you start asking the right questions. And the it there is the official story. So with chapter 7 and chapter 8, the more holes in the story, the more curious we are about what really happened. To use StoryGrid language again, this is a crime story that turns on the value of justice. As we go through the beginning hook, it's established that the town is actually sitting at the negation of the negation. Injustice masquerading as justice. And from 6, where we have the awful grocery store worker, that's like clear injustice, we're now getting more and more hints that we are actually seeing injustice masquerading as justice, which is at the very far end of that value scale line. And I'll put a link below if you want to read more about those values in the story grid. Let's move on to chapter 9, which I call The Victim is Not an Angel chapter. And this is a beat that I see a lot, especially in YA thrillers. Alexa Dunn's The Ivies does this as well. Very, very strongly. I think Pretty Dead Queens might as well. But basically, Pip talks to Andy's friend, Emma. She learns Andy was sometimes cruel to her younger sister, Becca. She learns Andy had a lot of money, but wouldn't say where it came from. She learns that Andy claimed to be sleeping with an older man, and that Andy's dad was having an affair, and Andy knew. Everyone in her orbit was so dazzled by her, so blinded, that they hadn't noticed a darkness that might have lurked beneath, not until it was too late. Investigative is, I need to call Ravi. So what's really interesting to me is that all 4 possible motivations, all of the strongest suspects, are discovered in this conversation. So Andy is cruel to Becca. Again, spoilers, leave now or forever hold your peace. Becca was also a killer in this scenario. So Andy was sometimes cruel to Becca. There's one bit. Andy had a lot of money, wouldn't say where it came from. That's the drug dealer line of investigation. Sleeping with an older man, that will eventually lead to Mr. Ward, but that's another thread of investigation. And then the dad having an affair, that is another thread of investigation. This feels like the real start of the investigation. So now we're no longer recounting already known information. We've poked some holes in it, and we're getting new stats, and we're getting these 4 lines of inquiry. So it really feels like we're right on time for break into 2. In chapter 10, Pip goes camping with her friends. And the narrative last line is, no one look now, but I think there's someone in the trees watching us. And that's really just a bounce into chapter 11, which is when Pip finds a pillow, or finds a note on her pillow in the tent. And the note says, stop digging, Pippa. Fox or deer, she couldn't tell, but they shrieked and cried, and it was and wasn't Andy Bell screaming through time. Stop digging, Pippa. Here we get a whiff of danger. Although Pippa still thinks it could be a joke, this is starting to put Pip's own physical safety in danger. A very clear stakes escalation. The last line here about Andy Bell screaming through time reads to me like a dramatization of the story's current state of injustice. So the victim, Andy, screaming through time for vindication, for truth, for consequences, for justice. And it's really emphasizing here again where we're sitting at on the value scale and the importance of the investigation. Okay, welcome to Act 2A, not B. Whoopsies. Well, okay. Welcome to Act 2A here. We are now officially in the middle build or the middle, and it's very interesting to see how these scenes follow very closely an action, revelation, decision structure. So keep an eye out for that. It's actually the middle build that made me want to analyze the last lines of every single scene because I think it creates a really strong blueprint for how you can keep the drive going through that middle build. Here we go into chapter 12. Woo. If I can find it on my thing. Chapter 12. All right. Pip is hanging out at Kara's, and she fiddles with Kara's laptop so she can track the documents printed on the Ward's computer. There's a mention of Mr. Ward at tutoring, which of course is a clue that we will have for a while there. She asks, why are questions about Andy Bell returning answers about the people closest to me? Again, that's just, I'm including that there just because it's a note at the stakes. Emma, the friend, reveals that Andy was angry with Mr. Ward the week she was murdered, and Pip wonders if Mr. Ward lied to her if he could have been the older man. The narrative question is, but how do you casually ask a grown man you've known since you were 6 why they lied about a murdered girl? Emphasizing the stakes here by reminding us of Pip's relationship to Mr. Ward is excellent timing. We also have the printer getting set up, and the printer is a Chekhov's gun that will come back at the climax. And note how this last chapter, or the last line of the chapter, establishes Pip's goal for the next scene. She's going to have to go ask Mr. Ward why he lied. Moving over to chapter 13. Pip, as she said in the last chapter, confronts Mr. Ward. He admits that he lied. Andy Bell was bullying someone named Nat, and he called her father rather than going to the school and getting her expelled. And now she had some answers, another real lead to follow, and one less name on her list. This is not the last line, but it's important because it is another red herring. Pip accepts Mr. Ward's explanation and stops considering him as a suspect. I don't know if his name even gets on the person of interest list, but if it was on, it is now off. The narrative is, but the lead was taking her back to Naomi, and Pip would have to look her in the eye again, like she didn't think there was something secret hiding there. This scene, especially this last line here, repeats Pip's desire, motivation, next steps, personal stakes, and inner conflict. Her personal stakes and inner conflict all kind of centering around that relationship with Naomi and Kara. And the investigative is, can you give me her number? And this is Pip asking for Nat's number from Naomi. And we're given sort of what Pip's next step is, what her next goal is. In chapter 14, Pip interviews Nat, who said she wanted Andy Bell dead, flat out. Nat's brother is a police officer, rumored to have slept with Andy when she was 15, and Andy used this to blackmail Nat. The narrative is okay. This is actually at the end of some cute banter between Pip and Ravi. We'll see a handful of less story-forward last lines here, and they're all concerned with that relationship building. After that scene, Pip gets Sal's interview with the police. It doesn't look good for him, and she remembers the threatening note on her pillow. The investigative line is, I just have to keep chasing, even when the path is resisting me. Here, with that damning transcript, we have a clear sort of obstacle to the protagonist's goal, and she decides to keep pushing against it. We also have had a negative shift in this chapter, but the restatement of her desire, again, keeps us going forward. I don't think that makes the scene a positive shift. It's a negative shift because Sal's innocence is now, in question more than it was before, but we keep the narrative drive. Moving over to chapter 15. In this chapter, Pip tries to talk to Becca, Andy's sister, who is not interested. I pushed my luck trying to question Becca. It was wrong. I just couldn't help myself. She was right there. The last person to see Andy alive. Other than the killer, of course. Her sister was murdered. I can't expect her to want to talk about it. And the narrative last line is, don't think that lady liked you, Joss said. Were you being unfriendly, Hippo Pippo? And here, the truth is hidden in that Becca really was the last person to see her alive. But Holly Jackson hides this fact quickly, getting us to think about the killer in the abstract and providing an alternative, believable reason for Becca's behavior. Note how most readers will go with what Pip is thinking. If Pip wonders it, the reader wonders it. If she dismisses it, many readers, will dismiss it as well. This is another good way of hiding clues in plain sight. And it's also helpful when we are so close to the protagonist's POV. You're able to do more of this, if the character wonders it, the reader wonders it. One of the benefits of close POV. In the investigative portion here, Pip talks to Becca's best friend and learns more about the Bell family. The dad sucks is basically what she learns. She also hears that Becca went to a party and needed the morning after pill the next day. I've already learned my lesson here. When you catch someone lying about a murdered girl, you go and ask them why. So here we have our revelation, which is Max lied, decision, go and ask them why, and new goal, get the truth from Max. I just want to know, if we go back, right here, chapter 12, we have a revelation that Mr. Ward lied, and then a decision to go ask them why, and the new goal, which is to get the truth from Mr. Ward. So we're following a similar revelation, decision, action, structure. Let's keep it moving down the line. All right. Chapter 16, Pip goes to talk to Max. She finds a naked picture of Andy hidden in the back of his room, and he says he found it in a classroom. Max denies he knew her well, and then he finally admits he was buying drugs from her. A crease split down the middle of Andy's body as he folded her away. This last line, the imagery, reminds us of the current state of injustice, the sadness of Andy's body not being found, not being given a proper burial, and the killer's current attempts to keep her real story from coming to light. At least that's what the imagery means to me. We're folding her away. We're showing, that she has not been sort of respected or given dignity in this situation. In chapter 17, Pip asks her friends about the next calamity party, saying she's gonna go, and she updates Ravi. The narrative line is, how are we going to find this drug dealer, though? She set her mug down and focused her eyes on his. I'm going undercover. Here, she shares what she learned from Max, makes a decision, follow the evidence, with a new goal established. Again, that revelation, decision, action, or revelation, decision, new goal structure that we are seeing in all of these middle build chapters. Chapter 18, Pip goes to the calamity party. She talks to a guy named Steven and finds out the name of his drug dealer. Then Steven tries to grope her. She gets scared. She runs away. She stood there alone, surrounded by people, an aftershock of fear quaking through her. And the investigative last line is, I need to find Howie, I need leverage, I need sleep. Again, we have new information, new goal, revelation, decision, action. In chapter 19, Pip stakes out a parking lot, and she follows Howie, the drug dealer, onto the street where Andy's car was found. The narrative last line is, I need you to come to Monroe right now, and she says that to Ravi. That is sort of our little cliffhanger. I would say that chapter 19 and chapter 20 form one scene. And in chapter 20, Pip and Ravi talk to Howie. They blackmail him into admitting he sold Andy roofies. And they also learn that she had a burner phone. The after-laugh sighs only set them off again. This is another relationship-building last line between Pippa and Ravi. The investigative last line is, but doesn't it seem a little suspicious that he's the journalist who wrote the scathing articles about Andy's killer boyfriend, and now he's dating her little sister, and I saw him giving money to the same drug dealer who'd supplied Andy? Or are these just coincidences? In chapter 121, Pip is at home and she gets a text message, which is, you stupid beep, leave this alone while you still can, from unknown. Note that this happens, it's maybe a chapter or two, a couple chapters after she talks to Becca, and she was just staking out someone that Becca is dating. But here, I think we can ask ourselves the question, why do so many mystery novels include threatening notes or messages to the main character? Again, Alexa Dunn's The Ivies does this. And I think, it's really there just to up the tension and create that sense of danger. Also, it makes it more of a thriller because the protagonists themselves are in danger. It also locks the character more firmly onto their path by showing that they're now implicated and that they're on the right track. The investigative last line is, I need that burner phone, and only then will I leave this alone. Unknown. So we have the new goal stated for the next scene. So just to kind of recap, throughout this section, we've really been focusing on those sub-goals. So first we hear that Mr. Ward was lying, and so Pip wants the truth from him. Then she needs to go talk to Naomi and she wants the truth from her. Then our next goal is to find out what Nat knows. Our next goal is to... our next goal is to talk to Max again and to get the truth from him. Our next goal is to figure out who the drug dealer is. Our next goal is to kind of figure out the drug dealer's name and what he knows. Our next goal is to find that burner phone. And now we are in chapter 22. If I can find it. Ooh. Oh, that was 22. We're in chapter 23. Okay. In chapter 23... Pip ditches school and breaks into the Bell's house. Pip ditches school and breaks into the Bell's house. Narrative is holding her wrist steady with her other hand. She guided the key into the lock and twisted. This scene establishes the so what, so it establishes stakes. If she and Ravi get caught, it will be very bad for Ravi. So we're about to have our new sub-goal here, which is to find the burner phone. We're going to do that by breaking into the Bell's house. And we need a little bit of stakes for this sequence, which are established right here. In chapter 23, Pip and Ravi search Andy's room, and they're nearly caught by Becca. Ravi opened his eyes slowly, squeezing Pip's hand back, his panicked breaths rippling through her hair. The front door slammed again. This is a very tense scene, made more so by the romantic tension and the stakes for Ravi. We have another sweet bonding moment, so we have a positive shift in the romantic relationship, and when Becca leaves, there's a shift from danger to temporarily safe. Investigative line is, looks like I'm going to Westport after school tomorrow, where again, Jackson is using those investigative reports to keep us clear on Pip's sub-goals every step of the way. In chapter 4, they visit an inn where a confused grandma says Andy Bell visited recently. Then they see Max and Howie fighting. The narrative is Max and Howie knew each other, yet another tectonic shift in the world of Andy Bell. So we're seeing characters colliding here, and we're getting ourselves some red herrings. Notably, it's interesting that the grandma is confused because we're not sure whether that's a credible clue or not. Investigative line is, if I can get on his Facebook profile, I can find something I can use to make him talk, or even better, go straight to the police with. So here, Pip is again zeroing in on Max. And her next goal, her sub-goal, is to find something on his Facebook, as we all do with social media. In chapter 25, Pip breaks onto Max's Facebook. She finds his, fake Facebook. It's not a Finsta, fake Facebook. I don't know how you do that. And she goes through his photos. And then the narrative line is, and in the dead of silence of the night, Pip whispered, who's taking the picture? And this time we're ending the chapter on a massive revelation. And we actually don't know Pip's sub-goal. It's not established here. It's just that revelation, which is, kind of a bombshell to drop, which, really pushes us into the next scene. I'm also going to note that the next couple of scenes, despite the fact that the midpoint is only supposed to be one scene, I would call 25 through about 28, 29 the midpoint sequence. So it's a sequence of scenes all kind of culminating in the midpoint. There's a lot of revelations and a lot of sort of upping the stakes, new understandings going on here. Really, this should be a drinking game. Every time I say the word stakes, take a sip. Chapter 26. Pip and Ravi recreate the timeline of the night of the murder using the timestamps on the photos on Max's Facebook. And they discover it wasn't physically, scientifically possible for Sal to have killed Andy. The narrative line is, Pip wasn't quite sure how to leave him. She didn't want to leave him. She touched his arm and walked away, carrying that look on Ravi's face with her. We get another shift in the romance and mystery plot simultaneously. We're also noting the escalation in personal stakes as Ravi and Pip get closer. Right now, Pip is caring more and more about Ravi. She doesn't want to leave him. This is becoming more and more important to her. Obviously, this is also a massive revelation and is part of that turning point. And basically, Sal is innocent. And now we know for sure. And that's huge. But I wouldn't call that the midpoint just yet. In chapter 27, Pip confronts Naomi and Max, saying she knows they lied about when Sal left Max's house. Narrative. She looked at Kara and then slowly over to Pip. And she nodded. Pip blinked. Why? Again, we land on something of a cliffhanger here, and we're going over to chapter 28, where Naomi explains they were blackmailed into lying to the police. Pip says she won't tell the police what they did because she loves Kara, but she will find out who really did this and clear Sal's name regardless. Pip stroked Naomi's hair and looked over at Kara, her best friend, her sister, as a weight settled onto her shoulders, the world heavier than it had ever been before. Again, we're getting a reiteration of the personal stakes for Pippa. Kara, her best friend, her sister. It's very, very personal now. It really, really does matter. Now, the first line of the investigative portion is, he is innocent. This project is no longer the hopeful conjecture it started out as. And the last line is, I need to try harder because the clock is against me now, and I still need to write my essay. So while the midpoint is supposed to be one scene, as I said before, 26 to 28, which is 53 to 58% of the book, make up the midpoint. This is where the true nature of the conflict is revealed. This is where everything changes, and this is where the stakes get visceral and undeniable. It's no longer just a possibility. Sal was innocent, which means we are definitely at a value shift of injustice. And Sal and Pip really has to prove Sal is innocent in order for justice to be done. We also have a ticking clock introduced here. It's a bit arbitrary, but it still puts pressure on the protagonist and creates a greater sense of urgency to the story. This is another crime genre convention. In writing the breakout novel, Donald Mass asks, can you point to the exact pages in which the stakes escalate, locking your protagonist into his course of action with less hope of success than before? Right here, Pip is locked in. Not only is proving Sal's innocence necessary for justice, now she's falling for his brother. And Pip has to be the one to do it, because if somebody else tries to prove Sal's innocence, they will implicate Naomi, and her best friend will lose her sister. Another family destroyed. And she has that 3 weeks.